Now, the killer of 3-year-old James Bulger and convicted paedophile Jon Venables will stay in prison after his bid for freedom was rejected. The Parole Board said they were not satisfied his release would be safe for the protection of the public.
Joining us this morning is author of The Sleep of Reason, the James Bulger case, David James Smith. David, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We were just talking off air. This is a book you wrote many, many moons ago because you wanted to try and get an understanding. You've made documentaries, you share platforms with Ralph Bulger, who is, by the way, back on this show on Tuesday, not speaking to anybody else. I, for one, completely am delighted by this result, and I hope he stays there forever. You, sir?
Well, I don't put it quite like that, but it was absolutely the right decision. I would have been amazed if the Parole Board did anything different than keep him in prison. But I think we do have to accept that he may be safe, fit or deemed safe to release at some point.
I hope not.
In the future. Well, the law takes its own course, you know, so we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
And can you give a bit of an explanation as to why he is still in prison? Because obviously there were 2 killers of Jamie, one of whom has been released and has been rehabilitated into society under a false name. Jon Venables has not. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, so Robert Thompson, as you said, has blended back into society. We haven't heard from him again. He hasn't committed any further offences. Jon Venables, sadly, went on to commit offences collecting child pornography. He was recalled to prison in 2010. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison. He was released and then he was found again to have collected child pornography. So he's obviously been very deceitful. And one of the things that the Parole Board mentioned yesterday when they issued their summary of the case was that they were concerned that he wasn't being open and honest with those who were. That's
the point, isn't it? The trustworthiness of Venables. The point that I made before is probably based emotionally on the fact that I know the family. I think a lot gets made about, rehabilitation. That's fine. I tend to want to talk about, and I know your book talks about it, a family who have been utterly traumatised and just ruined over 30 years because of this callous act. And I think that the very least the Parole Board should have done was what they did do. That's it. And one thing I was going to ask you, because you know this, we were talking about this earlier, when can he be released then? When's the next time we go through this debacle?
Well, I think he's got to wait for a couple of years now before he gets another opportunity to be released. I mean, I think you should bear in mind that Jon Venables and Robert Thompson were just 10 years old. They were still primary school children when they committed the offence. They did indeed, but they were 10 years old. They were still children themselves. So although they did what they did, they were 10 years old, they did murder a child, but we have to allow for the prospect of rehabilitation.
I can't have that, I'm sorry. We'll agree
in Robert
to disagree.
Thompson's case,
but
that's
Robert Thompson has been rehabilitated.
But the problem is, people will say to me, they'll go, but they were 10 years of age, they were young kids, there'll be a reason for it. There are plenty of 10-year-old kids, hundreds of millions of them, who have bad upbringings and don't live in a nice place and their parents aren't great parents, who don't murder kids. And the point that we always make, and I remember Ralph saying this as well, Nick, when we interviewed him, is they tried to grab a child 5 minutes beforehand who ran away from them. So that's premeditated. So we can sit and go, they were 10. They're evil. Evil.
Well, I can't accept that they're evil.
Why not? They murdered a kid.
Because I don't really understand what evil means. They did something terrible. They were 10 years old. They were barely at the age of criminal responsibility. And yes, I accept that there was a degree of premeditation.
But they must be evil to do that to a child.
The act, of course, is evil.
I mean, I can accept it's an evil act, but they're not evil. I mean, Robert Thompson...
You have to be evil to murder a child at 10. It's not excusable because of an age, is it?
Define
I mean, I think that's quite a simplistic way of looking at it.
How would you describe it to the viewers and me this morning, then? How would you describe a 10-year-old who tries to, 2 of them, who try to grab a kid who runs away, then they grab another one and they murder him? How is that not evil?
Well, I would say that it was that they were very disturbed children.
Come on, man. What, you're going to excuse it?
I'm not excusing it.
You're just saying that they were children. 10-year-olds don't murder other kids unless they're evil.
But I think the point that the wider
don't
point
accept that at all.
That needs to be made here
ridiculous
is that 2 young children at the age of 10 don't suddenly get an idea to act in this way. There must be something that is influencing them, or they've picked this up from some other source, because I don't believe that a 10-year-old child is purely evil in their soul and they would have come up with this.
You don't think there are bad eggs in the world?
Yes, I do believe there are bad eggs in the world, but how do we legislate for that? How do we legally punish people for being
Leave them in prison forever.
OK, well, Robert Thompson is not in prison forever. There's obviously different ways that people can be rehabilitated. The issue here, as we've said, is that he is continuing to pose a threat to
kids.
Children. I think it's really interesting that the Parole Board can make decisions based on his likelihood to reoffend when it's regards to child sexual abuse images, because he won't have access to that in prison. So they essentially have to take his word for it that he will not be accessing the internet when he's out in the real world, which of course is so incredibly accessible for everybody.
They said they didn't trust him though, didn't they?
Yeah, but how could they possibly ever trust him?
In effect, and that's been a problem for him, that he's been deemed to be a minimal risk on 2 occasions, been released back into society, and he's had access to the internet. Obviously deceiving the probation officer, those in charge of him. So until he can provide assurance that he is being open and honest about what he did and who he is, and that the risk can be mitigated in some way. I mean, it's not about him not having posing any risk, as long as he provides or there's a risk that can be managed in some way.
But you talk about a managed risk, that's the point, and Nick's right. He's been given 2 opportunities, and yeah, absolutely. I'm not trying to cause an argument. I know both of these people, and I will not accept. And I would always say to people like you, if that had been your 3-year-old son, you wouldn't be sitting here saying to me, "Oh, you know, in another couple of years he can prove it." Twice he's been let out. Twice he has been deemed to be a damage to kids. Right? The British taxpayer has paid for 30 years for that piece of whatever to rot. And there are, by the way, my friend, millions of people who think he should never see the light of day, and I make that's genuinely how I feel, because I know, having spoken to Ralph Bulger personally, not just on television, I know what it did. It ruined their marriage, it ruined their family, and Jon Venables is a menace and a liar and should never see the light of day. Can't change that opinion.
The other killer is out.
So what? We're not talking about the other fella, we're talking about a bloke who was let out twice and is a sexual... I mean, God, we talk on this show the whole time about how we should protect children and protect all these people. He is a danger to kids, and I would respectfully suggest...
So the justice system has worked?
No, not at all.
Because he's not been given parole?
I mean,
I think the justice system should throw away the key.
Well, then you're saying that we should do away with justice, that we should...
No, you're not. I'm talking about specific cases, and I said to you with respect...
Who decides which ones they are?
If that was your kid, what would you be saying?
Well, what about if it was
what would you be saying if that was your
kid?
If my child had done that, I would never want them out.
I want to draw a line at using people's individual children, because I think that is an emotive subject that I just don't want to get into. However, we would all agree, I think, just to end this segment, that justice has been served in the sense that he has not been released.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Which is absolutely important. Well,
it's just emotional to me because I know them, and that's the truth.
I understand.
Of course. Well, David James Smith, thank you so much for joining us this morning.